Liz walked along the deserted beach of Somerville, the sound of the waves crashing furiously blending with the whirlwind of emotions inside her. In her hands, she held a letter confirming what she had suspected for weeks. Ethan, her husband, was cheating on her with Bella, her best friend. The discovery was a brutal blow. The laughter, the lies, the nights he spent away claiming to be working, it all made sense now. She felt her body tremble, not from sadness, but from rage. What did Bella have that she didn't? And how dared Ethan cast her aside, as if all their years together meant nothing? But Liz was not a woman who simply accepted betrayal and moved on. No, she knew she needed to do something big, something that would change Ethan's life forever. And so, the idea was born. She would fake her own death. Liz spent weeks planning every detail. She chose a stormy night for her plan. Her father's fishing boat, which was anchored at the dock, would be the key piece. She was sure that with the wind and the choppy sea, it would be easy to make everyone believe the boat capsized and that she was dragged to the depths of the ocean. She made sure no other boats would be nearby that night. After all, the idea was to disappear without witnesses. On the night of the storm, Liz left a vague note about going out to think, and, without Ethan noticing, she drove to the dock. When she arrived, the waves were violently crashing against the boat, and the wind was nearly unbearable. Perfect, she thought. She made sure to be seen by a few people nearby, increasing the believability of her accident. Then, she boarded the boat, untied it, and headed out to sea. The execution of the plan was flawless. Liz threw personal belongings into the sea, including her favorite scarf, and then abandoned the boat in an emergency raft she had prepared days before. With the cover of darkness, she quietly rowed to a secluded beach where she had hidden a car and supplies to disappear completely. Within hours, Liz no longer existed. When the boat was found the next morning, along with her belongings floating in the sea, Somerville went into mourning. The town was devastated by the tragic loss of Liz, especially Ethan. He was destroyed, consumed by guilt. He spent his days staring at the ocean, hoping to catch a glimpse of his wife. "It was my fault," he repeated to himself. The memories of his betrayals with Bella haunted him, and the weight of his lies became unbearable. What Ethan didn't know was that Liz was alive. And from a distance, she was watching. Liz watched everything from a small rented house on the hill, overlooking the sea. It was a simple structure, far from Somerville, in a town where no one knew her. There, she spent her days following the news of her death and discreetly monitoring Ethan's life. Every expression of pain on his face filled her with a strange pleasure. After all, he had betrayed her trust in the worst possible way, and now he was paying for it. The first days after her disappearance were everything Liz had expected. Ethan desolate, Bella pulling away out of guilt, and the entire town mourning the tragic loss. Liz hoped that, over time, Ethan's anguish would lead him to a breakdown, to the point where he would confess the betrayal. But as the days passed, something began to change. A month after Liz's death, Ethan and Bella met again. At first, it was quick, secretive encounters, the weight of remorse evident on their faces. Liz, with a long-range camera, observed every moment closely. He wouldn't dare, not after everything, she thought, blood boiling in her veins. But to her surprise, Ethan and Bella grew closer. Initially, they exchanged quick words in public, as if they were just friends trying to comfort each other. But then things began to change. One night, Liz saw something that filled her with fury. Ethan and Bella kissed passionately in the darkness of a local bar. It was as if the mourning for Liz meant nothing to them anymore. Liz's revenge plan, which until then had seemed perfect, was starting to crumble. The pain she hoped to inflict on Ethan was dissipating, replaced by a new romance. Liz began to realize that maybe she hadn't taken everything from him as she had planned. "They are moving on," she murmured to herself, her voice heavy with anger. How can they forget so quickly? Blinded by hatred, Liz decided she needed to act again. This time, the game would be more dangerous. She started sending anonymous letters to Ethan, handwritten to appear as authentic as possible. In the letters, she spoke of secrets only Liz knew, insinuating that her spirit was present, watching everything. The messages were brief but powerful. "I see you, Ethan," or "She is close to you, but not for long." The first letter froze Ethan in fear. He looked around everywhere he went, as if Liz's shadow was always behind him. His hands trembled as he held the papers, his face pale, and his restless eyes searched for explanations he couldn't find. Liz knew she was starting to mess with his mind. However, even with the visible discomfort, Ethan didn't stop seeing Bella. On the contrary, the two seemed to grow even closer. Liz felt her revenge slipping through her fingers, and the sense of helplessness began to consume her mind. She spent sleepless nights imagining what more she could do to destroy them. One night, while Liz was spying from afar, she saw something that left her in shock. Bella was wearing a necklace she recognized. It was the necklace Ethan had given her on their first wedding anniversary. How could he have given it to Bella? Such a symbolic piece, full of promises. That gesture was definitive proof that he had completely replaced her. The rage Liz felt turned into despair. She began to question her plan. Everything she had done, all the pain she had caused, seemed to have no effect at all. Ethan was moving on with his life, and Bella, who should have been her best friend, was now proudly wearing something that belonged to Liz. At the peak of her anguish, Liz decided she needed to confront Ethan. She could no longer live as a shadow. The decision to fake her own death, which at first seemed brilliant, now trapped her in a solitary prison of hatred and regret. She would find him again, but not as a distant memory. This time, it would be face to face. That night, Liz descended the hill and went to Ethan's house. The place was quiet, the soft light from the living room indicating that he was home. Taking a deep breath, Liz walked up to the door, soaked by the rain that had begun to fall. Heart racing, she knocked 3 times. From the other side, footsteps approached, and then the door slowly opened. Ethan stood frozen, his face draining of color, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and disbelief. He tried to speak, but his voice was lost in shock. Liz, drenched, smiled faintly. "Surprised to see me?" she said, her voice echoing in the absolute silence of the house. Liz's death had been a lie, but the destruction she would cause now would be very real. The silence between Ethan and Liz was suffocating, the tension almost palpable. Ethan stepped back, unable to believe what his eyes were seeing. He whispered, as if fearing that any wrong word could bring irreversible consequences. "Liz, how are you alive?" Liz stood still at the door, still wearing a faint smile, but her eyes sparkled with a coldness Ethan had never seen before. "You look scared, Ethan. Weren't you expecting to see me?" she taunted, taking a step forward, now inside the house. The rain was falling harder outside, droplets running down her face, mixing with the anger contained within. I thought you were dead," Ethan exclaimed, nearly stumbling over his words as he retreated further into the living room. "Everyone thought you were dead." "That was the plan," Liz replied coldly. "And you believed it, didn't you? You suffered, you cried, and for a time, I even thought you felt regret. But then, Bella showed up, didn't she?" At the mention of Bella, Ethan went pale. His eyes darted around, trying to find some explanation for this surreal situation. "Liz, please, listen to me. It wasn't what you think. Bella and we—" "What were you, Ethan?" Liz interrupted, her voice now sharp as a blade. "Did you love her all along? Did you two laugh behind my back? You betrayed me, and you didn't even wait for my body to cool before you ran back to her." She took another step closer, and Ethan flinched. "That's why I came back. To watch as your life crumbles, piece by piece, just like you destroyed mine." Ethan began to cry, tears of pure despair. I made a mistake, Liz. I know I did. But I was lost. I didn't know what to do. I loved you, and I still love you. He fell to his knees, his face filled with regret. I didn't know what to do when you disappeared. I got lost. Bella was just trying to help me through the pain. Liz looked at him with deep disdain. Pain? You felt pain? I was your wife, Ethan. You promised to be faithful, and instead, you traded me in for Bella. I was alive this whole time, watching while you pretended to be devastated, only to end up in her arms. Ethan tried to stand, hands outstretched, as if wanting to touch her, but Liz stepped back, refusing any closeness. Please, Liz, I can explain. I didn't want this to happen. I hate myself every day for what I did. But please, we can fix this. We can start over. Liz laughed, a bitter and lifeless sound. Fix this? Her voice was a cold whisper. There's no fixing this, Ethan. I died for you that day. And now it's your turn to die, but not physically. You will suffer. You will see me in every shadow, hear my voice in your dreams, and live with the guilt weighing on your shoulders until the day you can't take it anymore. At that moment, the door to the house burst open, and Bella walked in. Ethan, what's... She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening at the sight of Liz standing, alive and threatening. Liz, my God! You, how? Liz stared at Bella with a venomous glare. Surprised? Did you really think you had taken me out of the picture? Did you think your betrayal would go unpunished? I've been watching you two this whole time. Bella looked at Ethan, then back at Liz, unable to process what was happening. Liz, please listen to me. I never wanted things to happen this way. I didn't know what to do after you disappeared. Lies, Liz shouted, with an intensity that made Bella take a step back. You always knew what you were doing, Bella. You always wanted what was mine. And now you got it. Congratulations. But it will cost you dearly. Very dearly. The atmosphere became heavy, the air almost unbreathable with tension. Bella, trembling, looked at Ethan, hoping he would say something, defend her. But Ethan was in shock, paralyzed by guilt and fear. Liz looked at the two of them, feeling a dark satisfaction at seeing the panic on their faces. I was willing to leave you both in peace, Liz continued, her voice lower but still cutting. I wanted you to suffer with guilt, to live with regret. But you don't deserve that chance. You deserve each other. Liz took one last look at Ethan, who now had tears streaming down his face. Goodbye, Ethan. Enjoy your life with Bella. But remember, I'll always be around. And, without looking back, Liz walked out the door, the rain pounding against her face. She no longer needed to hide. Liz's death had been faked, but its impact would be eternal in the lives of those two. And as she walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the storm, she knew she had completed her revenge. Thunder echoed in the distance as Liz walked down the dark road, feeling the weight of her mixed emotions. Heavy rain streamed down her face, but inside, she was calmer than she had ever been since discovering the betrayal. She had freed herself from the facade she created, but now, what would come next? The days of planned revenge, the hatred that consumed her, had given way to a silent emptiness. Liz wondered if she had truly gained anything by coming back. Ethan was devastated, Bella terrified. But what did that change? Her feelings for Ethan were dead, but the pain remained alive. As she walked away from the house, she suddenly heard hurried footsteps behind her. Turning abruptly, she saw Ethan running toward her, his face still wet with tears and rain. Liz, wait, he shouted, his voice desperate. He slipped in the mud but didn't stop, continuing to run until he reached her. Liz halted, looking at him coldly, saying nothing. His presence there, beneath the torrential rain, seemed irrelevant to her. Ethan, on the other hand, was exhausted, panting, but with a look of pleading he had never shown before. Please, he begged, his eyes swollen from crying. I can't live with this. I know I betrayed you in every way possible, But I can't go on like this. You are everything to me, Liz. I never wanted to hurt you. Liz watched him in silence, her breathing steady. The man standing before her was no longer the confident Ethan who had betrayed her. He was broken, but that no longer had the same effect on her. I don't care anymore, Ethan, Liz finally replied, her voice low but firm. You destroyed me, destroyed everything we had. I faked my death to escape this pain, but now I realize that no matter how hard I try, I can never erase what you did. You and Bella, you deserve each other. Ethan took a step forward, reaching out as if he wanted to touch her, but Liz recoiled. You deceived me, Ethan. And I deceived you. But now it's over. Ethan fell to his knees in the mud, as if his legs could no longer support him. Please, Liz, forgive me. I can't live with this. I would do anything to take it back. His voice trembled, as did his body. He was on the verge of collapse. Liz looked at him, but felt no pity. Just a deep exhaustion. I didn't come back to forgive you, Ethan. I came back to make you remember every day of your betrayal. But now I realize that doesn't matter anymore. Living with you? Living with her? That's your penance. She turned to continue walking, but Ethan's words stopped her once again. Liz, do you still love me? He asked, his voice barely audible, filled with fear and hope. Liz paused, feeling her heart race for a brief moment. Love? What was left of her to love someone like him? The pain had consumed so much that she no longer knew if she was capable of loving again. Looking toward the horizon, she took a deep breath and, without turning to him, replied, No, Ethan, not anymore. And with those words, Liz finally left him behind, walking alone down the dark road. This time, there were no plans, no revenge, no resentment left to keep her tied to the past. She was finally free. Thunder rumbled again in the distance, but Liz no longer heard it. Months had passed since Liz's confrontation with Ethan and Bella. She had left Somerville behind, along with the painful memories. What had started as an unrelenting desire for revenge had dissipated, and the emptiness she felt in her chest began to be filled with something unexpected, a search for peace. Liz had moved to a small, quiet coastal town called Portland, where no one knew her. She rented a seaside cottage and began working as a freelancer, using her time to reconnect with things she had set aside during her marriage, her hobbies, her passion for photography, and even the simple pleasure of walking on the beach. Everything was part of her healing process. She spent hours on the beach watching the sea, trying to understand what life had become. For weeks, she avoided interactions with others, isolating herself to deal with her own thoughts. She needed time to relearn how to trust and believe in herself. But as the days went by, loneliness no longer felt like her best companion. She began to frequent a small local bookstore, a cozy and discreet place where she could spend hours reading and getting lost in other stories. It was there that she met Alexander. Liz was flipping through a travel book, distracted by the lush landscapes she saw on the pages, when she heard a male voice behind her. That's one of my favorites. She turned, a bit surprised. Before her stood a tall man with messy brown hair tousled by the wind and a gentle smile. He wore a worn leather jacket and held several books under his arm. Liz looked at him for a moment, unsure of what to say, but Alexander, unaware of her discomfort, continued to speak. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Alexander. I'm passionate about travel books and thought I could recommend this one, he said, pointing to the book she was holding. Liz smiled faintly, grateful for the suggestion but not particularly interested in prolonging the conversation. However, Alexander had a captivating energy, a natural charm that made her relax. I'm just looking for something different, she said, more to herself than to him. Well, if you're looking for a change, this is the right book. It inspired me to travel to the French countryside. Maybe it will inspire you to do something grand as well, he replied, a spark in his eyes. Liz wasn't sure if she wanted to open up to someone so soon. Her past experiences were still very fresh in her memory, and the idea of getting involved with someone scared her. But Alexander didn't seem to be there to pressure her. He was light, natural. Gradually, without realizing it, Liz began to find comfort in the casual interactions they had. In the following days, they bumped into each other at the bookstore a few times, and they always ended up talking about books, travel, and life. Alexander didn't ask many questions about Liz's past, respecting the fact that she seemed to carry it in a reserved way. Instead, he spoke about his adventures, how he had traveled to different countries and lived unique experiences that changed his perspective on the world. There was something in him that Liz admired, the simplicity with which he approached life. While she still struggled with her past ghosts, Alexander seemed to have found a balance that Liz didn't know if she would ever have. One day, while walking together along the beach, Alexander stopped and looked directly into Liz's eyes. The wind gently blew, tousling her hair, and he smiled, saying nothing for a few moments. Then he spoke softly. "You know, Liz, I haven't known you for long, but something tells me you're carrying a weight that shouldn't be yours. Everyone deserves a second chance, not just to fix mistakes, but to live again." Liz felt a tightness in her chest. Alexander's words hit her deeply, more than anything else he had ever said. She had always believed that her life after Ethan would be a quest for independence, with no room for anyone else. Yet there, in that moment, she realized that maybe she was wrong. Maybe it was possible to start over, not in a new place, but with a new heart. She smiled, a genuine smile, and took a deep breath, feeling the salty air from the sea fill her lungs. "I think I'm ready to live again," she whispered, almost not realizing she had said it out loud. Alexander, sensing the significance of those words, moved closer, gently holding Liz's hand. "I'll be here if you want company in this new phase." It was simple, but it was exactly what Liz needed to hear. As the months went by, Liz and Alexander began to build something together. There was no rush, no pressure. It was a love that grew slowly, with patience and respect. Liz started to trust again, not only in Alexander, but in herself. The scars from her past were still there, but she learned to live with them, not letting them define who she was or what she could be. In the end, Liz found what she needed most: peace. And with Alexander by her side, she discovered that love didn't have to be a prison or a betrayal. It could be a safe place where one could start anew. Liz's life, which once seemed like an endless tragedy, was now a story of resilience and rebirth. And alongside Alexander, she finally felt that the future could be something to embrace, not fear. If you liked this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel and share the video, and see you in the next story.